So hello everyone. I hope you can all hear me all right. Thanks so much for joining our webinar. We're really excited to share these findings with you today. So this is our fifth project webinar, and we're coming towards the end of a project which is treescape expansion through planting and natural colonisation. And today we'll be sharing with you the results of lots of ecological fieldwork and habitat measurements, comparing new woodland sites that were created in different ways. So I'm going to hand over to Elisa, who's the project lead, who's going to give a brief introduction on woodland creation methods, and afterwards you'll hear from Laura, who's been doing the bulk of the fieldwork and analysis on the ecology side. And we'll have some time for questions towards the end. And yeah, please feel free to write questions in the chat as we go, or there'll be a chance later on to ask them. We've also got some other members of the project team here to help answer questions later. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. So are we good to go just now?
Yep, I think so.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining. It's really exciting to see lots of people interested in this topic. Elisa Fuentes Montemayor. I'm a senior lecturer in applied ecology. I'm based at the University of Stirling, and I lead the TreePlaNat project that Susanna has introduced. I'm just going to give a brief introduction just to set things into context, into different methods for creating woodland. And then I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's been leading most of the work that we have been doing as part of the ecological component of the TreePlaNat project. So very briefly, just to sort of remind us all why this kind of research is important. Woodland creation is seen as one of the key components of landscape scale restoration to mitigate the ecological crisis. And the UK, like many other countries, has really ambitious woodland expansion targets. And historically, woodland creation in the UK has been mainly achieved through large-scale tree planting schemes. But there are many challenges of scaling up tree planting to the levels required to meet these national targets. So, for example, making sure that we have enough nursery stock required to carry out all the planting that's needed. This has led to sort of a renewed interest in using natural processes to complement tree planting, and in particular using natural colonization, so allowing trees to colonize and establish in new areas naturally. Obviously, tree planting and natural colonization are very different approaches for establishing woodland, and therefore they're very likely to have different outcomes and also to be used by different kinds of land managers with different objectives. And this leads to a need for evidence for us to understand when, where, how, and for whom natural colonization may be a useful approach for creating woodland. So this illustration is just to visualize some of the different methods for creating woodland. As I said before, in the UK, historically, we have been mostly actively planting trees on areas that weren't previously covered by trees, for example, agricultural areas. And there has been a relatively reasonable amount of research looking into the outcomes of woodland creation through tree planting. So these are just some of the papers that some of our team have published in the past, focused, for example, on habitat development rates, soil quality, and biodiversity responses to woodland creation through tree planting. And one of the main outcomes of this, in particularly thinking about benefits for biodiversity, is that generally taxa are more abundant and more diverse in woodland creation sites that are well connected, that are larger, older, and more structurally heterogeneous. And I've highlighted this importance of structural heterogeneity because I'm going to pick up on this in a few slides. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we have, as I was saying, this renewed interest in using more passive approaches, like allowing trees to naturally colonize new areas. This obviously requires a relatively nearby seed source from where seeds and seedlings can establish into previously unforested land. There are so many sort of predicted or assumed benefits of using natural colonization as a method for woodland creation. For example, is perceived to be cheaper with lower reliance on planting stock, also more effective in terms of trees establishing only in sites that are suitable, and leading to a higher structural complexity than woodlands that have been created, for example, through planting. And as I was saying before, structural complexity has been identified as one of the key drivers of biodiversity value of woodland creation sites. So this is a potentially really important outcome and benefit of using natural processes to create woodlands. Natural colonization is also perceived to carry fewer risks, such as tree disease and pests that can come with imported tree stocks. But there are also many potential challenges associated with natural colonization. We know that it's a highly variable process and that it's very hard to predict the outcomes of using this approach. For example, trying to predict the tree density or the species composition of the resulting woodlands. And it's also strongly dependent on things like proximity, diversity, and density of seed sources, and also local site conditions and other factors like herbivory pressure. There has also been, especially in recent years, an increasing number of papers published on factors that influence the establishment rates, tree density across space and time, and the structural attributes of woodlands that are the result of natural processes. And it's great to see this evidence coming up. You may have attended some of our previous webinars from the PlaNat project, where some of the authors of these papers gave a summary of the work that they have done. But because natural colonization has not been, there's not that many sites in the UK that have been created through this method. This evidence is still based on a relatively limited set of sites, and there's also many remaining knowledge gaps in terms of the ecology of natural colonization. And one of those knowledge gaps is whether and how tree planting and natural colonization can be used in combination for a range of objectives. And this is particularly important because of the inherent benefits and challenges of the two approaches that I've outlined in the previous few slides. So planting and natural colonization can be combined in different ways. So for example, there can be an initial level of tree planting, low density planting, or also planting trees in clusters. That's also known as applied nucleation. And those two approaches can be used to kickstart natural colonization processes, so leaving space for trees to colonize gaps in these areas later on. But also there can be natural colonization initially, and then there can be some degree of supplementary planting later on to try and achieve certain levels of tree density or to introduce species that haven't managed to colonize these areas on their own. So this is just a sort of continuous gradient of active to passive methods for establishing woodlands. And this area in the middle, so the combination of planting and natural colonization is a key knowledge gaps, and that's partly what kickstarted our research project, so the treescape expansion through planting and natural colonization, or TreePlaNat project. And one of the things that we're doing as part of this project is assessing the ecological consequences of woodland expansion approaches that span the planting to natural colonization continuum. And specifically, we're interested in things like biodiversity value, ecological function, resilience, and income potential of woodland creation sites that have been established through these different methods. And I'm now going to hand over to Laura, who's going to tell us what we've been doing for the past 2 years or so. I'll stop sharing and let you share from this, if that's okay, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa. Right, hi everyone. While I try and do this, okay, hopefully we're going to resume where we just were. Yeah, I'm, oh boy. Hopefully this is loading up okay, but in the meantime, I'm Laura Braunholtz. I'm the postdoctoral researcher working alongside the Treescapes team, the TreePlaNat team on the ecological component of the project. So I'm just going to talk through what we've been up to. Thank you for that introduction, Elisa. Okay, there we go. Off to a good start. So, yeah, last summer, we did a whole range of surveys across relatively young woodland sites across England. So we had 28 sites, all of them were broadleaf or mixed broadleaf sites, a range of sizes. They'd all previously been arable or improved grassland sites, and we ensured that all of these sites were adjacent or in close proximity to established woodland. So at these 28 sites, we did a whole, this is just an image of what some of these sites look like. So on the far left is an example of one of our planted sites, which was quite a sort of stereotypical monoculture planted for timber production. On the far right is one of our natural colonization sites, showing off its wall of hawthorn and blackthorn. And in the middle is one of our mixed or hybrid sites where there was an element of planting and then space left for woodland to naturally grow up in the spaces. And we had 12 mixed sites, 7 planted and 9 natural colonization sites. And our mixed sites were a range of where they had spatially blocked out areas of natural colonisation and areas of planting, and then those where they had sort of interspersed low levels of planting, leaving space for natural colonisation to take place. Sorry. So that's some examples of what our sites look like. And in these sites, we carried out a range of surveys. So we established 10-metre radius plots, 3 to 5 at each site. And in these plots, we were doing a lot of the sort of traditional ground-based habitat structure measurements, so identifying trees and measuring them and that sort of thing. And we also did some LiDAR drone surveys, so flying drones over the entire sites to get an idea of habitat structure. And we also measured a whole range of taxa at each site, doing ground flora surveys, doing a couple of nights of moth trapping. We put out audio moths to do some acoustic recording and survey birds and bats. The ultrasound part is in square brackets because I'm not going to be presenting that data today. It's not quite ready yet. But also put out camera traps to look at the ground-based mammals moving through the sites. And we also were looking at some of the sort of ecological functions going on within the sites, focusing sort of on herbivory pressure, insect damage to leaves, and using these plasticine caterpillars to look at predation rates on those. So quite a comprehensive suite of surveys, and that was last summer. So since then we've been, again, some other things that we've extracted for each of our sites, because when we've been doing the modelling, we've been trying to sort of take account of the variation that there is in our sites that isn't just to do with how they were created. So looking at things like how long the woodland's been established, the size of the woodland, and then some of the landscape characteristics like the proportion of the area around our sites that's natural or semi-natural land cover. So those are variables that we included in our models, which I'll talk about shortly. Now we're on to the results. So first of all, looking at the tree species, so we encountered 25 species across all of our sites, and species richness of trees was sort of similar across all woodland creation methods, and the more sort of common species were found across all woodland creation methods. There was some variation in sort of the how dominant certain species were between and also within our woodland creation methods. So you can see this plot here on the right is showing for each of the species on the y-axis how much that species dominated the species pool. So for instance, willow and hawthorn, they were more likely to be the dominant species at natural colonization sites than, for instance, the planted sites. And in terms of habitat structure, some of the variables that we were looking at were similar across woodland creation or woodland establishment method. So things like stem density and basal area. It didn't show any difference across the woodland creation method, but mean stem DBH was significantly higher in our planted sites. And when we looked into that appeared to be sort of driven by these larger trees being found at older planted sites. So it seems that tree size increases more rapidly with age in planted sites than in hybrid and natural colonisation sites, which I think some of the research that colleagues at Forest Research have been doing sort of backs that idea up. And we can bring in some of the LiDAR data to sort of have another look at that. So this is the LiDAR data extracted down to, or extracted for our plot sites where we were doing those ground-based measurements. And here we're looking at those, the DBH along the x-axis and how that correlates with RH75, which basically means the sort of where 75% of the data falls below. So it's kind of sort of a canopy height measurement, basically. So we can see that those larger stemmed trees are also taller trees, which is what we would expect. And the beauty of the LiDAR data is that we can not only look at our plots where we were doing those ground-based measurements, but we can also get a picture of what's happening at the whole site level. So these are just some images created from our drone LiDAR surveys of the planted, the mixed and the natural colonisation. And I really like these images because I think you can quite clearly see the sort of the differences in how these established methods sort of look, and it's sort of this site, the mixed site down here, is one of the ones I was talking about where they've sort of blocked out the natural colonisation area and a planting area. So the planted area was this area in the top of the site. So yeah, that's just to give you a picture of what we got from the drone data, but then we can actually have a look at what it was telling us about the sites. And this is another, so similar to, this is another canopy height measurement. This one is looking at where so 90% of the LiDAR return points fell below these heights. So this is kind of, yeah, like the 90% percentile of height of the sites, and we found that it was significantly taller or higher in planted sites compared to mixed and natural colonisation sites. And okay, so another LiDAR derived metric is looking at foliage height diversity. So these two images are just to explain what I'm about to show you. So basically foliage height diversity is kind of like a Shannon index for foliage height. So if you think about binning the heights, the total range of heights found at a site into 1 meter bins, and then it basically looks at how evenly spread your canopy heights are between those bins. So you can look at total, so overall for the site, or what we also did was grid the sites into 5 meter squares and take the mean of those foliage height diversity bins. So this is trying to show you the difference of what a total versus a mean would show you. So in the left-hand one, if you were just looking overall at the site, you'd find that this would give you a 1, and same for the right-hand image. But when you're looking at mean foliage height diversity, so into these 5 meter grids, you're getting quite different values. So it's quite a nice way of looking at how the foliage height diversity differs across the site. So that's what this is doing. So the total foliage height diversity did not differ between woodland establishment methods, but when we were looking at that mean foliage height diversity, it was higher in planted sites compared to our natural colonisation sites. And that's what this figure is showing. And then a final LiDAR-derived metric to talk about is the gap fraction. So we found that planted sites had a lower proportion of gaps in comparison to our mixed and our natural colonized sites. A gap being defined as an area of at least 5 meters squared where the vegetation is less than half of the height of the surrounding vegetation. So i.e. Planted sites sort of tend to have a fairly uniform canopy height. Okay, yeah, there is a middle side. So now I'm going to talk about some of the biodiversity results. That was some of the habitat structure results. So looking first at our ground flora species richness. So yeah, we counted 129 ground flora species, and these were dominated by non-woodland species with 21 specialists and 46 woodland generalists. And we found that the proportion of species that made up these different habitat categories didn't differ significantly between our woodland establishment method. So that's what this figure on the right is showing. And we did find that woodland creation method did influence the species richness of ground flora with higher species richness in our mixed sites. And this is showing for overall species richness. We also did break this down looking at woodland generalist and specialist species just to double check that the trend was the same, and it was. So this is total species richness. And so we had a look at what was driving those. As I mentioned before, we were doing some modelling where we were putting the habitat structure and also those site and landscape characteristics into the model, and the trend of species richness. So in addition to our treatment variable being significant, the site gap frequency was a significant variable. So the higher amount of gappiness, i.e. open spaces in a site, the higher species richness of ground flora. And that was treatment had to stay in the model. So there's obviously something else happening that varies between our woodland establishment methods that we're not capturing with any of the other variables that we've tried in our models. So hopefully okay, so moving on to the moth species richness. Here our species pool was dominated by woodland generalists, and we had relatively few non-woodland species. And again, the proportion of habitat specialists didn't differ significantly between our woodland establishment method. And also, again, the woodland creation method was a significant influence on moth species richness. So again, it was higher in our mixed sites. And this also was true for when we looked at the just woodland specialists and woodland generalist species. And in this case, the sort of habitat structure variable that was significant in addition to woodland creation method was the foliage height diversity. So it seems that the higher variation there is in canopy height across the site, the higher the moth species richness. And finally, for bird biodiversity was our bird data. So using the audio moss, we detected 32 species of birds. Only 3 of these were woodland specialists, and then 8 woodland generalists. So the majority being non-woodland species. Those are the categories that given by BTO, just in case anyone interested. But yeah, again, the proportion of species that made up those habitat specialisms didn't significantly differ between our woodland establishment methods. And in this case, woodland creation method didn't have a significant role in the species richness. So there's no clear trend of species richness varying between our woodland establishment methods. Okay, leading on to talking about some of our ecological function results. So in relation to the bird species data is this caterpillar predation survey that we were doing using these plasticine caterpillars that you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. And we looked at the proportion of caterpillars that were predated or not. And we found there was no significant difference between the probability of a caterpillar being predated, whether it was in a planted versus another woodland creation method site. But when we were looking at our insect herbivory data, again, we turned this into a binary variable where we looked at the probability of a leaf being damaged by insects. And we found that planted and natural colonization sites had a higher probability of leaf damage than our mixed or hybrid sites did. So woodland creation method was a significant influence in these results, but none of our other variables were. And then this is a bit much, a few too many plots on one slide, but this is looking at our camera trap data on the top panel and our seedling and sapling browsing data on the bottom panel. So overall, we found relatively low evidence of herbivory on our seedlings and saplings. Only about 8% of our plots had any evidence of herbivory. And so despite there being a higher detection rate of herbivores at planted sites, which is what this top panel is indicating, there was no significant difference in the proportion of stems that were browsed between woodland creation methods. There we go. Okay, so that's this slide's just summarizing the results I've just talked about. So at plot level, woodland structure was largely similar across our woodland establishment methods, but there were larger trees that increased more rapidly with age in planted sites than in our mixed or natural colonization sites. When we looked at the site level using our LiDAR data, natural colonization and mixed sites have more open areas than planted sites did. And in terms of the biodiversity, mixed sites had higher species richness of moths and ground flora, but not of bird species. And some of our ecological functions that we looked at, so the mammal herbivory and the predation of caterpillars, were similar across our woodland creation methods, but insect herbivory was lowest in our mixed sites. So my final slide just thanks you for your attention. This is all of the members of the TreE PlaNat team. The LiDAR data that I presented was collected by Tiago and analysed by Sam. So apologies to them for butchering that. But yeah, I'll stop sharing and we'll take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how you've managed to relate some of the biodiversity findings to the differences in habitat structure. Yeah, we've got loads of great questions in the chat. So one of the ones at the bottom from Jeanette is, was there a difference in the distribution of woodland created by different methods? I think referring to deer. Red and Sitka are generally in different places to muntjac, mostly in planted areas, and the muntjac seem to go everywhere. Did you find anything like that?
Sorry, what is that in relation to where the deer were moving through our sites?
It might be, yes. I think so.
All right. We didn't, although, well, no, sorry, I'm not sure I can say we didn't because we had the camera traps in two locations, as in we had it in one location and then we moved it halfway through to a second location. But I haven't looked at anything to do with how those locations influenced and those detection rates. So those detection rates are sort of pooled for the entire site, I guess. So yeah, I'm not sure about how they were moving throughout the sites. If that
I think maybe Jeanette's question was more to do with the distribution of the sites, like across the whole study area, and whether or not that related to the distribution of deer, if that may explain why some species like red and Sitka are being sites in the planted versus muntjac that were present in all of the 3 different woodland establishment methods.
Sorry, yes, okay, that makes sense.
Sorry, that's me.
No, that's okay. No, that's me. So our sites were sort of across. Oh, we didn't just have planted sites in the north, for instance, where you might expect there to be just red deer. So we had a relatively even distribution of our sites in relation to latitude. We did also include latitude as one of the variables in our, oh, there you go. Yeah, hopefully you can see that. But yeah, we've included latitude as a variable in all of our models, in part trying to sort of capture any variation that comes through from that, but also because it relates to our sampling method, because we tended to sample our sites in the most sensible way, so moving north or then south kind of thing. So in relation to like the moth species and the plant species service. I hope that answers.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions on tree species. So someone has asked, do you have numbers on plot level tree species richness? And then there's also a related question around species composition. Have you explored whether species composition differs between the establishment methods? And do there seem to be some winners or losers in natural colonisation?
Ooh, that's a good question. So yeah, we do have the plot level data for tree species. So that's one of the one of the things that we've modeled, like looking at the variation, and the plot level kind of allows us to see how there's pretty high variation of species richness of trees, sort of both within woodland establishment method, like within sites and within woodland establishment methods, and then across woodland establishment method. Yeah, and I haven't actually, to the second question, that's actually not something that I've looked at yet. So that would be something interesting to follow up on. So I'm going to make note of that.
Great. And then Rihanna has asked, are these sites without any sort of management or intervention? And someone else earlier also asked whether there was deer management in these sites.
So there is deer management at the sites. A lot of them had like high chairs and were like employing people to do some deer control. We tried to speak to the woodland owners or managers and get a sort of rough idea of what was going on, but we don't have like a very comprehensive picture for all of our sites. But obviously, yeah, deer management plays a significant role, but none of them were deer fenced or anything. Well, one had been deer fenced, but the deer fencing was not good. So I'm trying to think of what the word for it was. It was compromised significantly, let's say. But I guess like we don't have information about some of the management that was happening very early on in the establishment, which would, like, I guess, play a significant role in the initial success of the woodlands establishing, particularly for the natural colonisation sites, for instance. But they're sort of varying levels of management, and that varies across our woodland establishment methods. So some of the planted sites are just sort of left to it. Some are managed because they are woodland timber production oriented. And again, for both the hybrid and the natural colonisation sites, some of them, the land managers were quite happy just to sort of leave to, and others they were doing some intervention. Yeah, so it sort of varies.
Great, thank you. And then, yeah, we've had a couple of questions around site age and biodiversity. So did you look at the effect of site age on biodiversity? And someone earlier also asked, would you expect the species richness, I guess, of trees, but potentially anything, to increase through time in naturally colonised sites?
Yeah, so age was a significant variable for our ground flora species richness, which, yeah, like I guess you would expect that more variety of plants to establish as time goes on. So that was in addition to the treatment, and also in addition to the gappiness variable that I spoke about. Age was a significant variable. It wasn't for bird species richness, and it wasn't for moth species richness, but it was for some of our habitat structure variables as well.
Interesting, thank you. And actually, in relation to that, Andrew earlier asked whether you looked at birds that are specialist in scrub habitat and whether they benefit particularly from natural colonisation?
Ooh, we haven't delved into the sort of characteristics other than, you know, the breakdowns I gave of sort of habitat affinities. We haven't looked too much at the species identity or any of their traits or anything. That's a potential follow-up piece of work that we'll be doing once the sort of general species richness and data is out there.
Great. And then, yeah, another question from Andrew. When did the tree planting occur on the mixed sites? I guess whether if you know or not. And yeah, was it at the same time that natural colonisation was starting to be facilitated, or afterwards? And you know, how much longer afterwards?
Yeah, so again, this is another thing that varies between our sites, but so some of the planting happened at sites where they wanted it to be natural colonization, but they weren't going to meet the grant requirements. So they did tree planting sort of, I think that has to happen. Is it within the first 5 or I can't quite remember, but based on their grant requirements, they will have planted it. So it was a few years after the natural colonization began, because they weren't meeting those targets. And in other sites, they were both established at the same time, either because they planted in left spaces, or they were doing that block planting that I spoke of. So for some of them, it's sort of maybe like a year or 2 difference, just, you know, because obviously it takes time to develop sites. So particularly for some of the larger sites. But yeah, in general, it was all sort of happening within the same time period.
Great. And we've got a question from Emma. What information did you collect on survivorship and gapping up in the planted sites, which is quite similar to what you sites actually?
Yeah, so we did seedling and sapling surveys, and we found that the stem density of seedlings and saplings didn't vary significantly between woodland establishment methods, although it was lower in planted sites than it was in mixed and natural colonization sites. Sorry, there was another part to that question, but I can't remember what it was. Was there?
Sorry, I've lost it as well. Lots of great questions coming through. Okay, it was, what information did you collect on survivorship and gapping up in the planted sites?
Okay, yeah, so I guess because we were doing sort of like one summer lot of surveys, we didn't really we counted dead and alive standing trees, which again, it wasn't something that varied significantly between woodland establishment method. It tended to be driven by the proportion of ash trees that were on a site, to be honest with you. That was like that seemed to, anyway, I haven't delved that deeply into that data to be the major factor in that. And in terms of like survivorship of new young trees, yeah, we looked at growth of seedling and sapling coming up, but we've not done any like repeat surveys, so we don't have any like temporal scale data on any of that.
Great, thank you. And yeah, there was some discussion towards the beginning actually about why planted trees seem to grow much faster than the trees in naturally colonized and mixed sites. And then similarly, were you able to take account of tree age when you were measuring DBH and height, because planted trees might be slightly older because they've already had a head start before they're actually put into the site?
Yeah, so we like took age into consideration, I guess, by including age as a variable in our model when we were looking at the influence of woodland establishment on DBH. And it was like a significant variable, but it was particularly driven by those planted sites that were older and had higher DBH. I think this is maybe where it comes into sort of a slight limitation of our sample size, in that it was particularly driven by 3 planted sites that were planted for timber production and were like the older sites in our planted range. So yeah, I don't have any like reasoning behind it other than those sort of site level information, but I know that that some of the forest research research on another project has found a sort of similar pattern, and I don't know whether Matt has any more information on that and wants to jump in.
I'm really sorry, I was reading the comments, so I didn't hear all your answer.
Oh, well, I
was trying to
think
keep all the questions on there.
No, that was fine. My answer was really just words, so you didn't need to hear it. But it was the study that you guys were doing, hoping you were involved in, but that looked at age and size of trees varying between woodland establishment method.
Yeah, so I think, you know, similar to what you've found here, that you over time at planted sites, trees obviously establish a lot quicker. I think a lot of the discussion in the chat's been around this. You know, you've got trees that are that have already germinated, they're already whips, and they're being planted, so they're a bit older. They're being potentially protected. There's some management going on at the site, so they're getting away quicker and establishing quicker. So you have a much quicker increase in woody biomass compared to natural colonisation sites. But what we found is over time, the natural colonisation sites do catch up. After 60 plus years, we've got sites that are more than 60 years old, so they do eventually catch up. They just take very sort of different trajectories. I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yeah, thanks.
Lovely, thank you. It might be a good moment to ask if anyone else on the team has anything they want to say, because we've had lots of parallel conversations of live and written chat.
I just wanted to say it's great to see so many questions and so much interest in this topic. So I just wanted to plug to one of the other outputs that we're working on at the moment. So Susanna and Vanessa, you may want to say more about this, but we're currently working on a frequently asked questions document around using natural colonization on its own or in combination with planting. So hopefully lots of these questions will be addressed in that output that hopefully will be coming out in a few months. So yeah, more to come.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Elisa. Yeah, and I guess it's also a good moment to say that we will indeed be uploading this webinar to our website, and we've got a link on there where you can add your email to our mailing list if you want to receive updates of other upcoming webinars. So we've got one in early December, which isn't advertised yet, where the social research team will be presenting their results of landowners' perceptions of different methods of woodland creation. And then I'm sure we'll have more final things to share as well as we wrap up the project. So we've still got a couple of minutes. I can see some more unanswered questions. Rihanna has just said, it sounds like woodland sites with management, for example, planted and hybrid, are better generally than those which are left entirely alone. It shows that natural colonisation sites still need management intervention for biodiversity objectives. Yeah, does anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe just to say that, yeah, that's very true. It's often sort of assumed that natural processes are just to be completely left to their own. But no, there's lots of management that's needed also to facilitate and enable that establishment, and also to promote habitat structure and biodiversity benefits that we expect from these woodlands. So yeah, I don't know if Matt or anyone else from the team want to comment on that.
I guess the only thing I'd add is, you know, in all of this, you've got to take into account what the landowner actually wants from the land. So, you know, you've got very different views of woodland creation, whether you want sort of to get woody biomass in there, you know, want to sort of capture carbon in trees, or whether you're happy just to leave it to scrub up and let woodland develop slowly, potentially increase your biodiversity, you know, potentially create sort of unique communities in there as well. So I think, yeah, the landowner perspective is quite important here.
Lovely, thanks. And yeah, someone said put cattle in there. There were some cows at one site, weren't there, Laura?
Yeah, there were some cattle in one site at least, potentially more than one. Yeah, they didn't do much to prevent willow dominating that site, though. That's all I'll say for that one.
Interesting. Okay, well, we're at 2 o'clock. I'm sorry if there are any unanswered questions. I think Laura and Elisa and Matt and others would be happy to answer them if you want to get in touch. And yeah, I mean, you can come through me if that's the easiest thing. I think we've got some contact details on our website, or maybe you guys could share your emails in the chat before we leave if you're happy to take questions over email. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, thank you everybody for joining us. It's fantastic to share these results and really nice to have so much interest, such good questions.